Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia, and welcome to a brand new tier list series on the channel covering the emblematic districts for Humankind. Now we'll be doing this era by era, starting with the ancient era here. As you see, we have all 10 emblematic districts for each of the 10 cultures currently available in the game. Now before we go on to rank these, we will first do an overview for each and every one of these districts in order to remind everyone how good or bad some of these districts are. So kicking things off, we'll start off with the Babylon's Astronomy House. So as you see here, the Astronomy House is a food and science exploiting district. It is considered a research quarter and a farmer's quarter. It has the bonus of +1 food and 1 science per researchers in the city that this is constructed in, and +3 science per adjacent farmer's quarter, as well as +1 researcher's slot. And like most district, it will lose you 10 points of stability. Overall, this is a rather nice district. And the reason being is if you construct this district next to an early strategic resource such as horse or copper, you will pick up both the food and the science yield on that district as well, since this is one of the few districts in the game that can exploit this combination of resources. And anytime you have a district that can exploit multiple resources in the FIMS, food, industry, money, and science, it is an excellent quarter or district, because later on, any infrastructure that can boost adjacency yield for farmer quarter or research quarter will be applied to the astronomy house. So you basically can receive benefits from multiple infrastructure down the line. And because compared to pretty much every single emblematic district in this era, this is one of the few that can provide you with early game science, which is going to be crucial in jumpstarting your choices of buildings, districts, as well as units to use in this first era. Then moving on to the Hittites, we have the Awari. This is an outpost building. So like all outposts in the game, it will give you exploitations of food and industry. And this will automatically upgrade every single existing outpost into a Awari for free. And you don't have to pay for this district because all you have to do is claim a piece of land. Of course, it will still cost you the same amount of influence, but there is no additional industry cost, unlike all the other districts here. The specialty of the Awari is, unlike typical outpost, you can use these outposts as spawn points for all nearby cities. So you don't have to attach this outpost to make it function like a garrison. Essentially, as long as you have a forward Awari, you can spawn your troops there, saving you valuable time to produce units and move them to the frontier. It's very good for early fighting choice. If you have a close neighbor, this could be an excellent choice. My one complaint about the Awari is that the Hittite as a faction, the unique unit comes from the wheel tech. It's a chariot replacement. So you don't actually gain access to it until quite late. And I believe it also requires 1 horse and 1 copper. So essentially you can't really rush any opponents down with your unique unit, so there lacks some synergies there. But in essence, if you find yourself with a very close neighbor, you could use a Awari to get the drop on them, produce a few scout riders, and just overwhelm them with cavalry before they can build a wall. And that can be a very effective way to wipe out a very early neighbor. But down the line, you essentially lose out on having an emblematic district for the era, as these will go away as soon as you level up to the next era. Then the next culture we have is the Harappans with their Canal network. This is a farmer's quarter. It will give 3 food by default, as well as 2 food per adjacent farmer's quarter, +1 farmer's slot on the city or outpost that it is constructed in, and you will have the -10 points of stability. The extra point here is that this tile will be treated as though it is a river after you construct the canal network. So you almost never want to build this on the river. And the cool thing about that is all infrastructure that boost food production on river, things like irrigation and reserves, will give you the extra food boost on this district in the future as well. So It's essentially creating a river tile for yourself. Obviously, this artificial river is not as strong as a natural river, in my opinion, because an untouched, exploited natural river can produce food and industry for you. Whereas the canal network, because it's a farmer's quarter, will only receive the infrastructure bonuses from the food-related infrastructure boost for river tiles. But overall, still a very powerful district for you in the early game, especially for a faction or culture that is agrarian in nature for affinities and can help you grow your population quite early on. Then we have the Confucian school for the Zhou culture, and this is a research quarter that only exploits science. And this is one of the few emblematic districts and districts in general in the game that rely on adjacent mountains. For each adjacent mountain, you will gain 5 science. By default, the Confucian school only produce 1 science and provide 1 researcher slot for the city and outposts it's built in. But like the Zhou's focus on stability, you will actually gain +8 stability per Confucian school. It seems like an odd number here, but the reason is because the Zhou legacy trait provide 2 points of stability for all district. Therefore, essentially, you'll get 10 points of stability for building a Confucian school. This might not seem like much, but in reality, it's quite a significant boost because it's really a 20-point stability swing for building a district. And that allows you to build 2 additional districts to end up at where your stability was going to be. As a matter of fact, for the Zhou faction, it wouldn't even be the case because the 20-point difference, when you build 2 new ones, you get 4 points of stability back because every district gives you 2 points stability. So you'll still be at +4, where you would have been at negative, essentially 30 for any other faction building 3 district. So it's quite powerful. Then moving on to the Mycenaeans, you have the Cyclopean fortress. This is a very interesting district. It's both a maker's quarter and technically a garrison. In game, it essentially says this is a maker's quarter, but the way you built this functions like a garrison. You can build this anywhere within your territory. It doesn't have to be adjacent to an existing district, which makes it very powerful because in essence, you're exploiting fresh tiles. You're exploiting 7 new tiles when you place this down. The tile that you place this on, as well as the surrounding 6 tiles, assuming there is space for them within the boundary of your territory. Whereas existing districts or new districts have to be built next to existing district for a regular maker's quarter. So you will be occupying a slot that's already being exploited and then only picking up a maximum 5 new spots. So you're missing out on at least 2 tiles of exploitation compared to the freedom you have with this emblematic district. Not only do you have that freedom, because this is a maker's quarter with industry exploitation, it's a great way to pick up mountain industry. And that's actually a pretty valuable source. Not only is it a good industry producer with passive 3 points industry just by building it, it is also a garrison, a very powerful garrison. You get 20 points of district fortification. The reason why you get such a big amount is because since this district is not attached to existing city district, or most likely it is not, it will not get the district defense bonus. Therefore, it's making up for it with this 20 point, which makes it pretty much a walled district by itself. And it gives you 15 points of stability, which is triple the amount you get with a regular garrison. Not only that, you get +3 combat strength in combat for units in and adjacent to this district, as well as the increase to the movement point of enemy armies within one range of this district to just 1 tile. So essentially, you make the enemy have a harder time to move around this fortress. Everything will cost 1 more move for them. And that's very, very powerful. If you have a mountain choke point, if you imagine that, drop this down. It's a spawn point for your unit because it functions like a garrison district. And you get extra defense. You pick up all the industry from the mountains nearby. And you gain 15 points of stability, which is excellent because as we mentioned with the Zhou building, typically an emblematic district is going to cost you 10 points stability. This one is a 25-point swing, plus all the combat bonuses and the ability to use this as a spawn point to launch your units closer to the enemy in the beginning. Very, very powerful. Then moving on to our next 5, we have the Dunnu for the Assyrians. This is a pure garrison, and it's a very good comparison to what we just saw with the Cyclopean fortress. This one is not a maker's quarter. You do not get any industries, you do not get any exploitations. So essentially, wherever you build this loses all yield, and you exploit none of the surrounding tiles until you're able to put a district on them. It will give you, however, 2 points of influence, but only 10 points of defense for fortification, and only 1 point of extra combat strength, and it does not block enemy movement. It still can be used as a spawn point like all garrisons. It is considered fortified, and the special thing here is you can purchase this in outposts using influence. So you can build this essentially in unattached outpost if you have the influence, similar to how you can build artisan quarters, how you can build harbors. It's the same strategy, or even planting trees. Those are technically sort of a build done by your outpost. Is it worth it? Not quite, because you only get 2 influence back, and you have to pay, I believe, around 40-ish. So it will take quite a while to pay yourself back with this building. Essentially, it's a good early rush option by dropping this from your outpost, because you don't have necessary influence to attach, or perhaps you claim the territory right next to an enemy you discovered that is medium distance or far distance away from where your cities are, and you're able to launch this garrison there so you can use it as a spawn point for nearby neighboring cities. So that's really how you should use this to help you rush down an enemy force. Then we have the Egyptians with their Egyptian pyramid. This is a pure maker's quarter that exploit industry. It has +1 influence by default, +3 industry. The adjacencies for other maker's quarters, 3 points for each, and +1 worker slot, -10 stability. Not a lot to say about this. Basically, it functions as a better version of a regular maker's quarter with a bit of influence bonus and some passive industry bonus on top. And then we can move on to the Phoenicians with their haven. This is a harbor district, but it does not replace the default harbor. You can build a haven and a harbor in the same territory. It exploits everything, which is how harbors work. But for bonuses, for adjacency, for infrastructure, it will only count as a farmer's quarter, a harbor, and a market quarter. That is still pretty impressive. The main focus of this district is money. So for each adjacent coastal water or lake, you will get 2 money back, and it'll give you 1 trader slot and -10 stability. Overall, most harbor buildings only suffer from map restriction. If you have a lot of water on the map, these are excellent because you can only build these in the water. If you don't have a lot of water on the map, then these are really bad. So the basis of how good they are is really on what map you're playing. But having a farmer's and a market's quarter quality on it compared to a regular harbor is pretty good, because if you build a harbor next to it, the market quarter adjacency will pay each other off. If you have a naval luxury resource like ambergris or pearl, the market quarter will also pick up extra money on those resources. Typical harbors pick up to 2 tiles away from where you place it for the water tiles in terms of exploitations. And on land, where you have adjacencies, you can go with either market, which is the typical neighbor you want with the harbor, or in this case, you can even build regular farmer's quarter for population and still receive bonuses on your haven for being adjacent to that. Then moving on to the Nubians, we have the Meroe pyramids. This is a dual exploitation district that count as both a maker's and a market quarter. So exploit both industry and money. As we mentioned before, anytime you have a dual capability, they're quite nice. And the reason why money and makers could make sense is you might be next to some sort of industry-focused luxury. Any luxury can have a market quarter adjacency bonus of 3 money. And when you build next to a Meroe pyramid, you can pick up the natural industry exploitation on them, whereas if you just build a market quarter, you will lose that exploitation on that resource. So this is quite nice. By default, 2 industry point, 2 money point, 3 money per adjacent maker quarter. This is actually very nice too, because you might not want to build that much market quarter in the early game because you don't even have the technology for it until you research a later tech. So spamming more makers quarters while getting a bit more money plays very nicely to how the Nubians want the game to go. +1 trader slot for it and -10 stability. Those are pretty standard. And then we come to our final culture, the Olmecs, with their Olmec head. This is a farmer's quarter that exploits food, and they focus on influence because the Olmec affinity is aesthetic, so they focus on influence for their extra stars. And this one gives you default 1 influence +3 food, and for each adjacent farmer's quarter, you get 1 more influence. It doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not really a lot, especially if you drag this out into the late game. But in the early game, this is a nice boost. And as you notice, you don't actually have that many ways of gaining influence aside from population and by having your main plaza, which now produces 6 points of influence basically per city. And that's a great way to produce influence early on. This will help that. And the faster you can produce influence, the faster you can pick up civics in the early game, the faster you can claim more territory in the early game, faster you can build more cities in the early game and claim your first wonder, maybe even a second wonder. So there are a lot of good things about this. And because this is a farmer's quarter, you can also focus on growing your population, which once again is a great way to grow influence, as calm cities or cities above 90% will give you 2 points influence per population. Cities that are stable between 30 and 90 will give you 1 point per population. And that's really how you have to grow your influence in the early game. So that's it for the overview of all 10 emblematic districts. Let's jump back to the tier list and rank these 10. Alrighty, so with our tier list here, we're just going to start from the bottom and go up. And I think the worst emblematic district and deserving of the D tier is the Awari. So the Awari, being an outpost, essentially outdates itself once you move on from this era. So you get nothing left for your work to use these. Obviously, you don't have to pay anything to get them, so they're extremely cheap, but they're not very helpful for you in the game. I already mentioned in the overview how the Hittites, which has the Awari, has a unique unit that doesn't come in until you get the wheel technology as a replacement for the chariot that require both a horse and a copper. So unless you have those planned out on the map when you created your first territory, this is really not going to help you rush out any enemies, especially considering the fact that chariot units struggle in the early game against taking cities because of walls. They're considered cavalry. They can't climb them. A single archer can wipe out your chariot unit standing outside a wall doing nothing. So the Awari will be D tier. Then right above this emblematic district is going to Dunnu. This is the standard garrison building replacement for the Assyrians. It's also very military focused. Its specialty is that you can use influence from your outpost to build this in order to gain a land unit spawn far away from your existing cities. It has a passive production of 2 points of influence, but compared to, say, the Cyclopean fortress, which is also a garrison building as emblematic, it's just far worse. So it's going to get the C rank here. Then in the B tier, we have quite a few choices with, say, the Egyptian pyramid. This is an excellent maker's quarter with a decent amount of industry production, which is very valuable in the game, but as a specialty emblematic district, so the replacement for, let's say, a common maker's quarter, I don't think it stands out that much. Now, of course, if you combine it with what the Egyptians can do with their legacy trade, it is excellent, but we're only comparing emblematic district here for our tier list. So as a straight up maker's quarters replacement, I don't think it's that impressive compared to some of the other choices we have in this era. So it's going to slot right in the middle here at B tier. And following it is going to be the Olmec's head. This is a standard farmer's quarter with a focus on getting extra influence, but at most you can get is 7 points of influence if you have 6 surrounding farmer's quarter around this district, which is often impossible. So you're getting 5 points of extra influence from this, perhaps, on average, is my opinion. And that doesn't make it that much better of a standard farmer's quarter. So I'm going to put it in the B tier aside the Egyptian pyramid. And joining them is going to be the Confucian school. Not because I don't like the Confucian school. I play the Zhou quite a lot. I think it's a very strong building, but it is very map dependent. There are times that don't see that many mountains. I am not going to build the Confucian school or pick the Zhou. And the reason being is if you don't have mountains, this is worth 1 science. And the bad news about the Confucian school is you have to put it next to mountains. And when you do, the exploitation on the mountains industry goes away. So you're losing extra industry that you would have picked up if you had just built, say, a maker's quarter next to 5 mountains, right? That picks up 20 plus industry in the early game. That's huge. You're giving that up in order to gain, say, 20 to 25 science, which is also massive in the early game, I understand. But there is no scaling on this building. It will never get stronger. Adjacencies for it doesn't make sense because you're already surrounded by so many mountains. You can't get surrounded by that many research quarters down the line. So it's a very isolating, self-sufficient building. It's excellent when the map is great for it, but you have to think about how do I place this district next to the mountains? I have to put my outposts closer to the mountain. I have to put my city closer to the mountain. And sometimes that's not really a good decision. And like I said, there's really no synergies after this era with this building, as you're not going to get any additional adjacency bonuses for putting another research quarter or another quarter of any type next to it while you eat up basically all the industries the mountain would have given you. So it's going to go into the B tier here. Then in the A tier, we have things like the Astronomy House. This is a dual resource or exploitating district that count as both a farm and a science quarter. That is excellent. It also gives your researcher the ability to produce additional food, which is also excellent. They're basically going to end up being mini farmers, considering each territory can let you build 1 astronomy house. So if you are in a city with 7 or 6 territories, if you build that many astronomy house, your researchers basically can double up as farmers by producing 6 additional food each. And that is very powerful. So this is a very excellent building that scales very well with how many territories you have in your city. Then joining it is going to be the Canal network. The reason being is it produces a lot of food. You have to consider that you can only build this as the Harappans. So the Harappan legacy trait does kick in a bit. They will give you all 1 additional food for any tile that produces food, as well as 1 additional food for any river. This qualify as both. It gives you a new river tile on the map to allow you to pick up your bonuses from any infrastructure that boosts food on rivers, as we mentioned. So it is actually quite powerful as a district, even though it does only exploit food. So it's not a dual exploiting district. Then joining these is going to be the Haven building. So I know I mentioned that this is rather map focused as well, but it does exploit all resource type. It has 3 qualities: counts as a harbor, counts as a farmer's quarter, counts as a market quarter. Getting an early naval tile will get you a lot of exploitations because it picks up basically 2 neighboring tile worth of water tiles for the exploitation. And on the land side, because this also counts as a farmer's quarter, you can build farms next to it to still get the bonuses, and you can build additional harbors next to it to double up the exploitations you pick up from the water tiles. Plus, you'll get the adjacency market quarter bonus between harbors. So there's a lot of ways to use this, and unless you're playing a Pangea map with no lake and no ocean to speak of, in most maps, this will be quite useful. So I think it's still ranked quite high because of its flexibility with the multiple exploitation type it has and how many different ways you can use this with the land adjacencies even. So I'm going to give it an A tier here. And then finally, the Meroe pyramids are also going to make its way. mainly for its dual capabilities between market and maker. And that's going to be a strong point for it, because you have luxury resources. Put this next to it, pick up the extra 3 gold yield from the luxury. If it's an industry focused luxury, you can pick up quite a bit of industry as well. Then you will get more money by building market quarters or maker quarters around it. You can also build market quarters, but essentially you kind of want to only build maker's quarter. You gained a default increase for the adjacency. The infrastructure increases later on is not going to impact that. But overall, it's a very flexible and solid choice for a faction that's very focused on luxury, as well as making money in the Nubians. And that leaves us with a Cyclopean fortress, and that's going to be our S tier emblematic district for the ancient era. The reason's very simple. It's a garrison building that counts as a maker's quarter. So you can build this anywhere within your territory. That alone is very powerful, because all the other districts, aside from the harbor and the outpost, have very, strict requirements of being adjacent to an existing district for your city. The other garrison building, the Dunnu, obviously don't have that restriction, but because it is just a garrison building, you don't exploit anything. So that freedom offers you no reward. Here, the freedom allows you to pick a spot with a high concentration of industry, and you can exploit all 7 tile worth of that, plus the 3 default industry on it. And not only do you get a lot of industry early on with this emblematic district, it is still a very powerful garrison with 20 points of garrison defense plus 3 points of combat strength for not only this tile, but all adjacent tile. So basically that 7 tile of industry area that you picked out is also going to be a great place to fight, because you get 3-point adjacent, or just the 3-point of combat bonus for all those 7 tiles with this district as the center and the 6 surrounding tile. Very useful. You can also trap enemy armies in natural choke points because of the way this also reduces enemy movement. Overall, it is just a very powerful garrison that will be useful for you throughout the eras. And the 15 points of stability, also impressive. If you erase that 15 points, I will still probably put it S tier. But with 15 points, you essentially get 3 garrison worth of stability boost for your city. And the difference between this and any other district not named the Confucian school is essentially 25-point flip for building an emblematic district for your faction. And that is just huge. So this is my tier list for the ancient era for the emblematic district. I'm not considering legacy traits for the most part. I'm also not considering what unique unit they have for the most part. So this is not a culture tier list, but rather just how good these districts are, especially if you consider how they would change and adapt as you move from era to era, which is why Awari is on the very bottom there. Now, if you disagree or have some awesome way you've been using a certain district, feel free to write them down in the comment below. And once again, everything here is based on the most recent patch. So if patch changes happen in the future and some of these become irrelevant, we'll come back and adjust our list in another video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. We'll come back tomorrow with the tier list for the classical era. Until then, bye.